table and said, "It's over. We're getting divorced." She lowered her eyes and just nodded. No fight, no begging. That almost hurt more than the betrayal. The divorce process was cold. Paperwork, signatures, waiting rooms. Sitting side by side like strangers. I didn't tell my parents the truth. I didn't tell friends. I said, we couldn't make it work. I wanted to protect my son from the truth, at least while he was small. When the judge finally declared it done, I felt nothing. Just empty. The months after were hell. I woke up alone in that apartment. I made 2 cups of coffee out of habit. I turned on the TV just to hear voices. I lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, remembering how we used to talk before falling asleep. On weekends, I had Marco. He would run into my arms, smiling, laughing. Once, he asked me, "Dad, are we going to live together again?" I hugged him tight. My throat ached. "No, son, but I'll always be here for you." He nodded, but I saw the confusion in his eyes. And when he went back to her, I sat in the empty apartment and broke down again. A year passed. Slowly, I began to rebuild myself. Work kept me going. I joined a gym. I forced myself to meet friends. I even took a trip alone, just to feel like I was moving. I tried dating. A couple of women. They were kind, patient. But I couldn't trust. A message on their phone sent me spiraling. A late reply made me suspicious. I hated it. I hated what I had become. One evening, a close friend told me, "You're still living in the past, Andre." Maybe, I admitted, but the past lives in me. 2 years after the divorce, I saw Elena again outside Marco's school. She was with another man. They were holding hands. She looked happy, truly happy. I stood there, watching. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel anger, not even jealousy, just calm. That night, as I tucked Marco into bed, something shifted inside me. I realized I had let go. Yes, she betrayed me. Yes, my world collapsed. But I survived, and I had the chance to rebuild. I looked at myself in the mirror before going to sleep. For the first time in years, I didn't see a broken man. I saw someone who had walked through fire and come out on the other side. Scarred, yes, but alive, stronger. After that night, life didn't suddenly become easy. I would wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking about her, thinking about us. About what I could have done differently. I'd replay every argument, every missed birthday, every time I came home late and didn't notice her sadness. Guilt mixed with anger, and it was exhausting. I started keeping a journal. Not for anyone else, just for me. I wrote down every thought, every memory, every fear. I realized that writing helped me understand myself. It forced me to confront feelings I had buried for years. I wrote about Marco, about the way he smiled when he ran to me on weekends, about the first time he called me, "Best dad ever," after we built a Lego tower together. Those moments became my anchors, little islands of sanity in a sea of chaos. On some weekends, I would take Marco to the park. Watching him play, hearing him laugh with strangers or his friends, I saw life in its purest form. And then, inevitably, I would feel the shadow, my mind slipping into what he didn't understand yet. "Why isn't Mom here?" he asked once, and I froze. I had no easy answer. I hugged him and said, "She's busy, son. But I'm always here for you." He nodded, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. It was a tiny crack in his innocence, and it hurt more than any betrayal I had endured. I started therapy. At first, I was skeptical. Sitting across from a stranger and talking about your deepest fears, your anger, your pain, your shame. It felt unnatural. But slowly, I started to see it as a mirror. The therapist didn't tell me what to do. She asked questions. Simple ones. What do you need right now? What are you afraid of? What does Marco need? Answering them forced me to peel layers off myself I didn't even realize I had. I began to confront my emotions honestly for the first time in years. I admitted that part of me still loved her. Not Olena, the woman I had married, but Olena, the mother of my son, the woman I had built a life around. And then, slowly, I admitted that I didn't love her anymore, not in a way that would allow us to be together. That was the real shift. The moment I accepted that, I began to regain my life. I threw myself into work. Projects became more than just a source of income, they became a way to channel my restless energy. I started learning new skills, taking courses, improving my professional life, not for her, not for anyone, but for myself. I realized that life doesn't stop after betrayal. It continues, cruelly, beautifully, and you have to decide whether to be broken by it or to rise. And then, slowly, I started dating again. Not seriously at first. Coffee, dinners, conversations. I noticed how difficult it was to trust. Every casual text made my mind race. Does she care? Is she texting someone else? Am I enough? It took months before I could sit across from a woman and genuinely enjoy her company without the shadows of my past creeping in. Marco remained my center. One afternoon, we cooked together. Just the two of us. He was messy, spilling flour, breaking eggs, laughing like the world was simple. And I laughed too, genuinely. That was the kind of happiness I hadn't felt in years, real, grounded, unguarded. 2.5 years after the divorce, I ran into Olena at a school event. She was with someone else, holding hands, smiling, light in her eyes that had disappeared long ago when we were together. I felt a pang. Not anger, not jealousy, but a strange, hollow acknowledgement. She had moved on, and so had I, though differently, slower, painfully. That night, as I tucked Marco in, he said, "Dad, are you happy now?" I looked at him, really looked, into those wide, trusting eyes. I didn't lie. "I am, son, I am." And it was true, in a quiet, resilient way. Months passed. I started traveling again, exploring small adventures, hiking, reading, even writing short stories in my journal. I learned to enjoy solitude without it feeling like loneliness. And then, finally, I began to plan the future, not with someone else necessarily, but for myself and my son. I understood now that I could create happiness, even after betrayal, even after heartbreak. I began mentoring younger engineers at work, sharing lessons not only about the job but about life, about resilience. I discovered that teaching others brought me unexpected fulfillment. I started to smile more, laugh more. The heaviness inside me that had consumed years of my life slowly lifted. One quiet evening, alone in my apartment, I sat with a cup of coffee and looked at the city lights outside my window. It struck me, life was fragile, unpredictable, painful, beautiful. I had lost much, yes, but I had found myself. And that, I realized, was worth more than I could have imagined when everything fell apart. I had walked through fire. I had been betrayed. I had hurt. I had loved and lost. And now, I was alive, whole in a new way, ready for the next chapter. Scarred, yes, but unbroken. After the divorce, life felt like a strange, empty void. I woke up every morning in that apartment, alone, with only the hum of the city outside the window. The silence was deafening. For weeks, I avoided looking at her photos or even thinking about her, but the mind has a cruel way of replaying memories you don't want. Every corner of the apartment whispered her presence, her favorite mug in the cupboard, her scarf on the coat rack, the faint scent that lingered long after she was gone. I spent hours walking through the city, trying to breathe, trying to find myself again. Some days, I walked aimlessly, letting Marco play in the park while I drifted along the streets, watching strangers, watching life happen without me. At first, I felt like an observer, not a participant. Therapy became my refuge. My therapist never offered easy answers. Instead, she asked questions that forced me to look inward. "What do you want, Andrei?" she asked once. I didn't know. "Do you even know who you are anymore?" That question haunted me for weeks. I realized I had been living in the shadow of a life I thought I deserved, a life I thought she deserved, without considering who I was. I began small. I started cooking for myself. Not just instant meals, but proper meals. The act of preparing something from scratch, chopping vegetables, stirring sauces, setting the table, it gave me a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. I noticed that taking care of myself, even in minor ways, was a form of therapy. Marco was my anchor. On weekends, he was my little son, always bright, always full of questions. "Dad, can we build a spaceship today?" he would ask. And we did, out of cardboard boxes, tape, and imagination. In those moments, I felt alive again. I realized that my love for him was the most stable thing I had left. And in loving him, I began to love myself. Work became a distraction at first, but then a new source of pride. I threw myself into projects, not to escape, but to prove to myself that I could still create, still achieve. I began mentoring younger engineers, teaching them not just technical skills but patience, resilience, and how to navigate failure. It was strange, but helping others reminded me that I had something to offer the world, something that wasn't dependent on her or anyone else. Slowly, I ventured into dating again. The first date was awkward. I sat across from a woman, trying to make conversation, and felt the old anxiety creeping in. What if she betrays me? What if I am not enough? But I reminded myself, trust has to start somewhere. Every new connection was a small act of courage. Some relationships fizzled, others ended amicably. But each taught me something about myself, about boundaries, about patience. Travel became my therapy too. I started taking Marco on short trips, weekends at the countryside, visits to historical towns, hiking in the mountains. We slept under tents, cooked on small stoves, explored trails. Those trips weren't just about adventure, they were lessons in resilience. They taught Marco, and reminded me, how to embrace uncertainty and enjoy the present. 2 years after the divorce, life began to feel lighter. I would wake up, and the first thought wasn't about her anymore. It was about Marco, or work, or the book I had been reading, or the hike I had planned. I started laughing again, fully, not just out of habit or to be polite. I noticed a warmth returning to my chest, a quiet contentment that I hadn't felt in a decade. One evening, I saw Olena at a school event. She was with another man. They were holding hands, smiling, clearly happy. I felt nothing at first. Not jealousy, not anger. Only a strange hollow acknowledgement that our lives had diverged. That was the moment I understood. Closure doesn't come from confrontation, it comes from acceptance. Evenings with Marco became more meaningful. We played chess, baked cakes, read stories. Sometimes, when he fell asleep, I would sit by the window, looking at the city lights, reflecting on how far I had come. I realized that I had survived betrayal, heartbreak, and the collapse of my world. And in surviving, I had learned to build something new: trust, patience, and self-respect. I also began reconnecting with friends I had neglected. We went to cafes, shared meals, talked about our dreams and failures. It reminded me that life is communal, that happiness is not just private, it is shared. Friends became my mirrors, reflecting back my growth, my resilience. At work, I started leading bigger projects. Challenges that would have overwhelmed me before now felt manageable. I trusted my instincts more. I spoke up more. I took risks. And every risk paid off, not always in success, but in growth. The year passed, and then another. I noticed a subtle but profound change. I was no longer haunted by her betrayal. I was haunted by memories, yes, but they no longer controlled me. I could think of her and feel nothing but a faint melancholy, like remembering a book I once loved but had read to the end. One day, Marco asked, "Dad, will you ever get married again?" I looked at him, really looked at him. "Maybe, son, when the time is right. But the most important thing is that I am happy and that I am here for you." He smiled, and in that moment, I felt a completeness I hadn't known in years. Life had given me a second chance, not to go back, but to move forward. And I realized something crucial. Betrayal and heartbreak can destroy you, or they can teach you how to survive, how to rebuild, how to love yourself first. The choice is yours. I chose survival. I chose growth. And I chose to be present, fully, for my son, for myself, and for the life that awaited me.